Hi, in this video we are going to take a look at adding positive and negative integers. Let's use the number line to add two numbers. First, two positive numbers and then two negative numbers. Let's start with 2 plus 3. We all know the answer is 5, but let's look at the number line. First, let's graph 2. That's a positive 2, and it goes to the right because it is positive. And then we're going to add 3 onto that, which is also a positive number, so it also goes to the right. And you can see where we end up is the number 5, so the number 5 is the answer to 2 plus 3. Let's look at this other problem. I have two negative numbers. First of all, negative 4. And when it's a negative number, we would go towards the negatives, which is left. So that's a negative 4. I'm going to add on to that a negative 2, which also will go to the left because it's a negative number. And you can see where we end up with is negative 6 for my answer. Let's take a look at something here. I've got 2 and 3 and 5. And then down here I have 4 and 2 and 6. Notice that I'm ignoring the signs and I'm just looking at the number part. Well, that's what we call the absolute value of the numbers. Look what happens if I just add the absolute values. 2 plus 3 equals 5. And down here I have 4 plus 2 equals 6. So it looks like in order to get the correct answer, if I have two positives or two negatives, I need to add the absolute values. But then I have to decide what sign goes on the answer. And the way that it works is the sign that is on the two numbers that I add is going to be the same as the sign that I put on the answer. So by definition, if you add two numbers that have the same signs, we actually add their absolute values. So if the signs are the same, add the absolute values. And then to decide what sign goes on your answer, we're going to take a look at the signs on the numbers that I'm adding. So the sign will be the same as the sign on the numbers that you're adding. So if you have two positive numbers, you will get a positive sum. If you have two negative numbers, you will get a negative sum. So let's do a few problems. First of all, 4 plus 22, they're both positive and we know the answer is 26. Now let's look at negative 3 plus negative 9. As soon as you see they're both negative, take a look at their absolute values. 3 plus 9 is 12, so you write 12 down. Then you look and see that they're both negative, which means that your sum will be negative. The next problem is 5 plus 7. They're both positive, and I add them together to get 12. Then I look at the next problem, and they're negative, so if I look at the absolute value of both numbers, I get 4 and 8. I add those together to get 12, and then since they're both negative, the sign on the sum is going to match, and it will be negative. I think the problems that are the most difficult are the ones where you are adding a positive and a negative number. So we're going to look at a couple of those problems on the number line first. Let's start with the first problem. I put a positive 3 on my number line, and it's going to the right because it's positive. But then I have to put a negative 7, so I start where I ended my 3, and I have to go to the left. I'm going to go 3 units to get back to 0, and then I have to go another 4 units for a total of 7 units to the left. So if I look at positive 3 plus negative 7, I end up at negative 4 for my answer. This next problem starts with a negative. So the first thing I will do is I will put negative 5 on my number line. That's going to the left because it's negative. Now I'm going to add a positive 8, so I have to go to the right. It will take me 5 units to get back to 0, but then it will take me 3 more units to go a total of 8 units to the right. So if I take negative 5 plus 8, I'm going to end up at 3, so my answer is a positive 3. Let's take a look at the absolute values like we did in the last problems. I've got a 3, a 7, and a 4. And in the other problem, I've got a 5, an 8, and a 3. Now, what do you notice about those numbers? How are they related? So if I look at 3 and 7 and 4, the relationship is 7 minus 3 equals 4. And if I look at 5 and 8 and 3, the relationship is 8 minus 5 equals 3. So it looks like when we add a positive number with a negative number, what I'm actually doing is subtracting their absolute values. So let's take a look at the first problem. If I take 3 and 7 and subtract and get 4, I then look at which number is larger, because I know the answer is 4, but since 7 is larger than 3 and its sign is negative, it dominates the answer, and the answer will be negative as well. So let's look at the next problem. I've got an 8 and a 5. Now the 8 is positive. There's no negative sign there, so that it's a positive number. We went to the right on our number line. So since the 8 is positive and 8's larger than 5, my answer is going to be positive. Now, we don't usually write plus in front of a number if it's already a positive number. But in this example, just to show you that it's a positive 3, that's what we're going to do. So my answer is a positive 3. So when we add and we have a positive and a negative number, the first thing we're going to do is actually subtract and get the number. In this case, it's a 4. Down below it was a 3. So you write those numbers down, and then you have to decide on the sign. So whichever number had the larger absolute value, its sign is going to dominate your answer. Now let's look at a few examples. Okay, looking at this first problem, I've got 4 plus a negative 20. Now as soon as you see you've got a negative number involved, you need to look at the absolute value of the two numbers. Since I have one positive and one negative, I'm actually going to subtract 20 minus 4. So when I subtract 20 minus 4, I get 16. So I go and I write down 16. Then I need to compare the 4 and the 20. The one that's larger is 20. And since its sign is negative, my sign on my sum will be negative 16. The next problem, I've got a negative 3 and a positive 15. So we take a look at their absolute values. I've got a 3 and a 15. So I go and subtract those, and I take 15 minus 3, and I know that's 12. So I write 12 down for my answer. Then I compare the values of 3 and 15. Since 15 is larger and it's positive, my answer will also be positive. For the next problem, I have 7 plus negative 5. So I'm going to look at the absolute values, and I'm going to subtract 7 minus 5. When I do 7 minus 5, I get 2. So I'm going to write down 2 for my answer, and then I'm going to look at the 7 and the 5. Since 7 is larger and it's positive, my answer will be a positive 2. And then when we look at the last problem, I've got one of each, so again I need to look at the absolute values and I need to subtract them. 14 minus 6 is 8, so I write down an 8 for my answer, and then since 14 is larger than 6 and 14 is negative, my answer is going to be negative. So here's our summary. If you're going to add two negative numbers or two positive numbers, you're going to add the absolute values, and then the sign on your answer is going to match the sign of your original numbers. Now, if you add a positive number with a negative number, or a negative number with a positive number, if you have one of each and you're adding them together, you're going to actually subtract their absolute values, and then the sign on the number your answer will be the same as the sign on the number that had the larger absolute value.